Hi guys, and welcome back to my corner of the internet and YouTube's. We're still having an issue with the microphone. It is not microphoning very well today. We're obviously still having an issue with the lighting. I'm sorry, we're gonna figure that out as we go. But today I just wanted to have a quick chat about book rating systems, how I need to implement a better rating system for books because I have been a little generous with some of the books I've read recently and I kind of knock it down. I need to be both objective and subjective just to be fair to you when I'm recommending a book to you. So I want to tell you how I rate books and how I need to continue to rate books going forward on this channel when I'm recommending a book to you guys. If you want to skip right ahead to the rating system and how I want to rate books, I'll put a time thing in the description box below so you can just skip ahead. But I do just want to say that all of this started because last night I fell asleep after finishing Weyward, and that is a 5-star book for me. Even though it is not going to be one of my favorite books, even though I have plenty of new favorites this year already and a favorite new series this year already, none of them are 5 stars. None of them are perfect books. And Weyward may not be perfect, but there's nothing wrong with it that would make it a bad book. The only reason I wouldn't recommend this book to a number of people just blatantly is because there are a bunch of trigger warnings for me and for a bunch of other people. They won't negate the rating of this book. I know it would impact some other people, like they just can't handle reading certain things, and I totally understand and respect that. But other than that, Weyward is going to be a 5-star book, but it's not a favorite. It's not going to hold a special place on my shelves or in my heart, but it was a book that I don't think enjoy is the right word, but I do think it's a book that a lot of people can agree with me that it is one of the better books of last year. Another thing is talking about some of my favorite books of the year. When the Moon Hatched, one of my favorite books that I've read so far in 2024. There were pacing issues. Sometimes the romance brought me out of the story and I just got bored with the romance. There were some things that just confused me that I don't think were explained very well, mostly the time thing, which still kind of bugs me. The trope wasn't like severe. The female main character, she is tropey. She is a character that we've kind of read before. She's not cut and paste the same female main character we read before, but once you've read this book, you know where you've read someone like her from. And it's not completely original, even though it is a beautiful story, a beautiful world, and beautiful characters, especially our male main. But it's not a 5-star, and I didn't rate it a 5-star. I will say it's one of my favorite books of the year. Calypso, another book that I just finished. I know it's going to be one of my favorite books. This one only had a little bit of pacing issue, not enough to bring it down a whole bunch of stars, and that was when we were getting kind of an info dump from a side character that appeared out of nowhere basically to info dump on us. So that kind of was a pacing issue. But another thing that will affect the rating of this book overall, a reason that I can't give this book a 5-star and just go around recommending it to everybody, is it is a deep book. It is very thought-provoking. It's not an easy read, even though it is short. It's under 225 pages, I think. Sheesh, meow. It's under 225 pages, I think, but it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to read a book and have like a philosophical conversation in their head, wants to just sit back for a few days after the fact and just think about these thoughts instilled in their brain. And that's why I love this book. If it was just my enjoyment, then it's a 5-star, but I know it's not a perfect book. And then a book that I have been very generous with was Dragon Fruit. I think I gave Dragon Fruit a 5-star just because of the readability and the kind of the simplicity of the story. But going back, I was probably way too generous with my rating on that book because we got a whole lot of world building, a whole lot of character development, but there were some pacing issues. We didn't get as much story as we could have gotten. At one point we wound up in a canoe and I don't even remember getting into the canoe, but that's probably my fault. But even though very quick, very fun, very easy read, 5 stars in readability, 5 stars in enjoyment, 5 stars in world building, but there were flaws, and most of those flaws were in the storytelling itself, because even though we have a very well-defined world, we could have used more story. Under 350 pages, you want to focus less on developing these individualized characters and more on telling the story, unless it's the first in a series, which I'm still not sure of. And that's going to bring me to my next point, where you can't just have a rating for a book and rate the whole series in the same way. Under the Northern Sky, I haven't read the 3rd book in the series, but I can tell that this is already going to be a 5-star series. for me, and I can recommend it to anybody that is into military political fantasy as a 5-star book. Anybody that likes Game of Thrones minus the spicy, you will like this book. Anybody that's into anthropology, anybody that's into not epic fantasy but military, I think I already said military fantasy, this is a 5-star series, even though the books themselves may not be 5 stars. Once the series comes together, if it comes together the way I think it's going to, and I've already started the 3rd book and it's doing just that, so I can tell that even though the books themselves were maybe 4 stars, the series could be a 5, but at the same time, we have a bunch of book series that have that middle book syndrome. Think of Iron Flame, and I'm going to use that as an example twice. Think of Iron Flame, where the 2nd book in the series upset and disappointed a lot of people that were absolutely in love with the 1st book. So you can't just rate a series on one book, and you can't rate a series, and you can't rate a book in a series without taking the other books into consideration. The series is going to be its own sort of. So these are the things in no particular order that are going to be criteria for how I'm going to be rating a book, and then I'll just average out the scores. The stores at the same time are just numbers I'm magically pulling out of my head, as all people rating books do. There's no perfect mathematical equation for doing this, but I'll average out things. And some books will have factors in like writing style, which if I really hate an author's writing style, which I know some people won't, I'll disclose that at the beginning if that's something that makes me knock down a couple of stars. Lee Bardugo. But and if it's a series, that's something I'll also disclose, like, yeah, the series is 5 stars but the book is 2, and the book is a 5-star but the series altogether is a 3, because only this one book was really amazing and then the rest all went downhill. But that is something I will disclose with every rating, and that'll be sort of an individual thing based on rating. Personal enjoyment's always going to be a factor in every rating. I'm a human being. I'm not a machine. Whether or not I can stand reading a book, stand to characters, get enjoyed, get bored, get disgusted, that's going to play a factor in the rating. So personal enjoyment right off the bat is going to affect my rating. The readability, like I said, Calypso, favorite book, going to be a new favorite book. I can't recommend that to everybody because I know it's just not straightforward, easy peasy, smooth reading, not fast paced. Whereas Weyward, 5-star book, not a personal favorite. Anybody can read this book. If you're okay with the trigger warnings, it's an easy read. It's just like sitting down and watching a movie. It's a fast read. I think I read that book in 5 hours. I know that's not going to be everybody, but that's just saying how easily accessible the language and the level of mental stamina you have to utilize to enjoy a book like that. So readability is going to play a factor in everything. Like, I want to give Calypso 5 stars. I can't, because I know not everybody's going to enjoy that. I want to give Brandon Sanderson 5 stars. I can't do that because I know not everybody wants purple flowery writing. Originality is something else. When the Moon Hatched, some things are very original, some things are very tropey. Still, that really didn't affect my rating too much because the way it was worked made it an original story. Weyward, a 5-star book, felt like a baby between 1990s Julia Roberts movie Sleeping with the Enemy and Practical Magic. If those 2 movies had a baby and put a show on Lifetime about DV and SA and child loss, that's Weyward. It's a story that I've read before, but the way that they made these characters and the way that they intertwined these stories is what made it an original story. So even though the ending wasn't something that blew my mind and I didn't see coming from the 3rd chapter, it is still something that you enjoyed the journey enough, because even though you feel like you've been in this world before, it's still original enough and told originally enough to not knock it down a star. These are 2 things that are huge for me. They might not be huge for everybody else. And one of those 2 things is character development and character growth. I really like not flat characters. I don't mind if they're multi-layered, because, you know, characters are supposed to have multiple layers. Look at Oathbringer. Can we just appreciate Oathbringer for a while? Weyward, the characters were really well defined. Dragonfruit, the characters were really well defined. When the Moon Hatched, we have a bunch of really well defined characters. They all grow, they all go through these journeys. And that's something that I think is really important. If a character is a certain way for a certain number of pages and then flips to a totally different personality, or they don't have any personality depth whatsoever. Like, you could be a bully in the book but still have a heart of gold. That's not what I'm talking about. That's the layers I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the character has no depth and they're just a placeholder, or the characters just feel phony, then that's obviously going to affect my rating. World building is also something really important to me. It doesn't have to be an original world building. You don't have to have maps and a whole political system, but especially in fantasy, especially in fantasy series, the world has to make sense. You have to have the political climate. You have to have the ranges. You have to have a feel for the environment in a book. And I think in books like even like Babel, pretty sure it's Babel, then that world is defined in the Stormlight Archive, the Cosmere in general. It is really well defined. Under the Northern Sky, these are all every series behind me, the world is defined really, really well. I have yet to come across a book in recent years where the world just felt flat. And luckily I don't have an example for that. But honestly, that is something that is really important to me. Developing the world building, especially in fantasy, if the world isn't developed, it's going to knock it down a lot for me. And then we have believability, and I know that's a weird thing to say, especially from a fantasy and science fiction reader, but I mostly mean believability in interpersonal relationships in books. I'm going to use Iron Flame again. We had these 20-something-year-olds basically acting like middle schoolers with their communication issues in a relationship, and it brought me out of the story so many times. They're having the dumbest fights about their relationship, and it brought me out of the story so much, not because they were having these fights, but because these are two young adults that are essentially leading a revolution, and they're having a fight about communication throughout the entire book, and it is the stupidest fight, and it brought me out of the story because these two can't lead a revolution. I don't care if what their political position is, I don't care who their parents are. These two are the ones leading no, it's not believable. It's ridiculous. When it comes to something like that, or like someone is just being super like animatedly fictitious in a book, and you can tell it's just a poorly written story, then that's going to knock down my rating some more. On the other hand, if the characters really mesh very, very well, and the interpersonal relationships and the situations all make sense, and that goes with character development and world building, then of course it'll just raise it on up to a 5. In Weyward, all of these characters and the world, well, the world not really, because the world is our world, but all of these characters in these situations, they were believable. I know that it's not based on a true story, but I know that these things happen, and I know that this is how people would react in these situations, and I know that these are the circumstances that would happen among this. In Red Rising, things that happen to people when they are children are going to affect the decisions they make throughout their entire life. And even if that is some petty argument, not petty, and even if that is some event that happens when you're a child and you're a military leader as an adult, that thing that happened to you as a kid is still going to affect you as an adult. And that's a sort of believability I can jive with. Iron Flame kind of failed us on that one. And if I'm taken out of the story that much because I just don't believe anything that's going on, any of these situations or interpersonal relationships are fathomable, then I'm gonna knock it down some more. Does the book meet its intention? What do I mean? Calypso is going to be an example I use. I'm going to be using recent reads, obviously, mostly in this book. Calypso, I think, was intended to be thought-provoking. I really hope it was, and it was. It told its story. It made me think. I read it 4 days ago now. I'm still thinking about it. I want to talk about this book, but it did what it was intended to do. If I'm reading a horror story, I want to be scared. If I'm reading a thriller, I want to be curious but anxious at the same time. If I'm reading a romance, I want to be really drawn in, and I want to go find my man and show him how much I'm enjoying the book. But that's the sort of thing I mean. If it is meant to influence some sort of catharsis or some sort of mood or some sort of feeling, then I want the book to do that. I just don't want to just close the book and be like, okay, next one. I want the book to meet its intention. That's exactly what I mean. If it's a comedy book, I want to laugh. If it's a satire, I want to laugh. If it's a fantasy, I want to feel all the feels in the fantasy. I want to emote with the characters. And that's something I look forward to in books, and that's one of the reasons that I love reading so much. When it comes to romantasy, I have to read those really objectively because a lot of the time I'm very jaded by romance books because I have read a lot of them and I do find a lot of them very cheesy. But that's something I would always disclose. I'm not going to knock down something because I don't like romance, because if everything else is fine, then just because I don't like romance, I'll still read romantasy. I'm not going to knock it down because, oh, I'm so tired of the spicy scenes. Like, no. It's a romantasy. There's going to be spicy scenes. I can't knock it down for having those. And that's something I want to disclose in all videos. I'm not totally jaded to the point where I can't enjoy a good cozy romantasy book or a romantasy. I read The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, and it's not for the spice. It was just a nice, cozy, romantic fantasy that I really enjoyed. And I think that's a good example of another 5-star book. Not for spice. If you're going in for spice, that's not what you want to read. Ice Planet Barbarians, obviously not a 5-star. I can enjoy what it is and recommend it to people looking for that, but I can still read a romantasy and give you an objective and subjective rating. But I'm going to tell you from the get-go, I'm not a romance reader. I do not read books for the spice. I did not read Throne of Glass or ACOTAR for the spice and for the romance. I read Throne of Glass first. I read Throne of Glass before I read ACOTAR, and very different stories, same realm-ish. But very different stories, very different feelings. I enjoyed both of them, but I can tell you I did not read either for the romance, but I do appreciate the romance that was in there. I'm not heartless. But me not being a big fan of romantasy and romance is something I always would want to disclose before a video. Something like having romance in a book is not going to knock it down unless the romance is just so bad. Unless they're fighting about not asking one another questions or something silly like that, then I'll knock it down. Or if it's a book that's meant to be spicy and it is as dull as sandpaper that has been used 700 times, then I'm gonna say, look, this isn't my level of spice, but if you're looking for spice, this book is as bland as milk. So those are just some things that I wanted to talk about with you guys today. I don't know if anybody's gonna watch this video, just like I don't know if anybody's going to watch any of my videos, but that is something that was keeping me up a little late yesterday after I read Weyward. Not all of my favorite books are going to be 5 stars. They're not all going to be for everybody, and not all of my 5-star books are going to be favorites. I can honestly say that if you have no real problem with the trigger warnings, I have problems with the trigger warnings, but it's not enough to affect me psychologically once I close the book. If you know the trigger warnings for Weyward and you are okay with digesting that sort of material, Weyward is a 5-star book. My favorite books are not. A lot of my favorite books are not 5 stars. A lot of my favorite books are 3 stars. A lot of my favorite books are just trash. But they're my favorites, and that's something that I think we need to accept as readers. We don't all have the same tastes. All of our favorite books aren't great books. And that's just a conversation I think we need to have on the internet more often. And that's all I have to say. I'm kind of hungry, so I'm going to go make a sandwich. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, you guys, and I will see you next time. And if you want me to do a more broken down or an actually broken down review of Weyward, and I think I pretty much broke down why it is a 5-star, but if you want me to break this book down a little more or give you a synopsis of it, or if you just want to discuss it with me, let me know in the comments. I did get mine on Book of the Month. Oh, look at that. It was one of the Book of the Year finalists. So I guess other people agreed with me. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next time.